Natasha,
Debbie,
show.
the show.
Welcome to it. Just two patriotic girls.
Learning about the world.
So please, don't take us the wrong way.
Hi, welcome to the Natasha and Debbie show. Somebody's got a new shirt and said I wasn't allowed to see it until we recorded our video.
It's my new favorite shirt. It's hilarious.
It's your new favorite, so I've got to see this.
I've been keeping it from you for like 3 days.
I know, she's been hiding it. Oh my, mind the gap. That's freaking awesome. Still, we can't high five. Let's do it again. There we go. We got it now. I love that shirt.
This
That's
is my
amazing.
new favorite shirt.
I can see why.
Yeah, I got it a couple days ago.
I can see why. I think everybody's going to want one now.
I don't know about that.
I love it.
Hi.
Hey, we're so glad you guys have joined us. And I know a lot of you do tune in to see all of Natasha's wonderful t-shirts.
No one does.
Yeah, they do. I read a lot of comments about that.
Nobody says they watch our show just to see what t-shirt.
Well, a lot of people do pay attention to it.
Well, I got news for you. Come here soon when it's no longer warm out. It's back to hoodies and nothing but hoodies. Thanks for being here today, guys. Please hit that like button if you like our content.
And consider subscribing, but only do so if you want to.
But don't forget, it's free.
That it is.
Unlike anything else in life, really. Today, we are going to check out a video that's it's been out for a few months, almost a year. But it's a topic we haven't really tackled. The title is
How the British Empire Became the Biggest in the World.
I don't actually know these details. Do you?
I don't, and it seems kind of odd that such a small landmass could rule so much.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And this is also what's intriguing about this. And of course, this is something we talk about and walk around on topics all the time when we've done the channel. So, I mean, how much they can fit in a 22-minute long video, we don't know. But I'm interested to learn about this and try to take as much in as possible. We're thinking about doing here on the channel, she keeps bringing this up to me, taking a British citizenship test.
Yes, I think that would be fun and interesting to see which one of us would pass. I think she would pass.
I think you're giving way too much credit.
And I'm pretty sure I would not. I'm not really good on keeping those details in my head.
Well, I think if we were even considering to do that, we'd have to watch this video and take it all in. Now, in the comments, if you'd like to see us fail at taking a British citizenship test, it's hard to say for me, let us know. But until then, we're going to dive in and learn how the British Empire became the biggest in the world.
If you were to look at Britain on a map today, you'd be forgiven for thinking that its borders only encompass those of the British Isles. But if you look at the world as a whole, you will find that there are actually 14 overseas territories where the British government still holds power.
We do this.
From Gibraltar, at the entrance of the Mediterranean, to the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic, these are the last remaining possessions of Britain's once mighty empire. At the height of its territorial control, a little over 100 years ago, the British Empire covered 1/4 of the globe's landmass and ruled almost 1/3 of the world's population.
It's crazy.
It was the empire on which the sun never set. But how did such a small island nation become the largest and most powerful empire the world has ever seen? This is the history of the British Empire. The foundations of the British Empire were laid long before the state of Britain even formally existed. The dominant power in the British Isles throughout much of its history has been the Kingdom of England. With a well-developed economy and military force to match, England, during the medieval and early modern periods, came to rule over the smaller, independent kingdoms in Wales and parts of Ireland. Although, to the north, the Kingdom of Scotland remained a fiercely proud and independent nation who had bitterly and successfully resisted frequent invasions from its powerful southern neighbour. By the early 17th century, Elizabeth I of England had issued several trading and exploration commissions to English adventurers, with the intention of exploring and colonizing new territories yet to be claimed by other European powers. The likes of Sir Francis Drake and Sir Martin Frobisher claimed many lands in the name of England, but these were not followed up with settlements. The first English colony, established in North America at Roanoke Island in 1585, failed dramatically, with the colonists mysteriously disappearing, never to be seen or heard from again.
You don't know that?
Wow.
Elizabeth also granted several royal charters to joint stock companies, who were established specifically for the purpose of developing overseas trade. Companies such as the Levant Company, founded in 1592, and the East India Company, founded in 1600, were granted monopolies on all English trade to and from these areas.
Wow.
When Elizabeth I died in 1603, the throne of England passed to James VI of Scotland. Upon his ascension to the throne, James became the king of both Scotland and England through the union of the crowns. However, the two kingdoms remained distinct and were ruled separately. As king,
I remember we did learn that in that one video.
You'll know him from things like the Bible. Like key trans. Yeah, never mind.
the two kingdoms remained distinct and were ruled separately. As king, James looked to build further on the attempts of his predecessor to establish overseas colonies that were to be ruled and governed under one of the three types of colony structures. A crown colony was directly ruled by the monarch themselves, but would typically be administered by a royally appointed governor and supported by a local council.
Sorry, I have a question here. And I should know this, but I don't. I actually know quite a bit about Queen Elizabeth I because I fell in love with the movie with Cate Blanchett back in, when it came out and watched it a lot. But I don't know, like, I know she's the Virgin Queen. She had no kids, obviously. So King James, did she appoint him? I don't know that. How was he appointed? That's my biggest question is, did she herself appoint him to be her successor or not? Just a curiosity there on that one.
Very good question.
A charter colony was similar to a crown colony, but was ruled under a corporate charter rather than a governor. These charter colonies often granted colonists significantly more political liberty compared to other colonies.
Okay.
A proprietary colony was governed by an individual who was typically the head of a joint stock company. These colonies were distinct from crown colonies in that they were commercial enterprises with responsibilities to shareholders. Proprietary governors typically did not live in the colony, and so appointed local governors and councils to rule in their absence. Over time, however, these proprietary colonies became increasingly difficult to manage and transitioned to crown colonies instead.
Makes sense.
I always wondered how they could rule so many different parts of the world when they weren't like right there. I mean, how could you control them?
Yeah.
So that helped to explain that a little bit.
An important yet often overlooked development in England's overseas expansion is that of the plantation of Ulster, which saw Protestant settlers from Scotland and England transported to parts of the north of Ireland during the early years of King James's reign. This model of organised colonisation would form the blueprint for future English colonial expansion, with many of the leaders of the Ulster plantation later becoming involved in establishing other colonies in the New World. Throughout the 1600s, the Kingdom of England expanded its overseas colonies in North America and the Caribbean. Some were entirely new ventures, whereas others were annexed from rival foreign powers, like New York, which was seized from the Dutch in 1665. England also significantly developed its trading networks in Africa and the East Indies, with the building of factories and fortified trading posts. A critical component to this mercantile success was the creation of the Royal African Company in 1660, who, over the subsequent decades, would become the leading participant in the brutal yet highly lucrative transatlantic slave trade. During this period, Scotland also began to establish overseas colonies of its own, having looked on somewhat enviously at the successful endeavours of the English. Unfortunately, almost all these attempts ended in failure, with colonies in Nova Scotia, Cape Breton, and Carolina barely lasting a few years. The most abject failure of Scotland's colonisation attempts, however, came in 1698 with the Darien Scheme. This aimed to establish a colony controlling the overland trade route of the Isthmus of Panama between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. To finance the expedition, an immense amount of capital was raised from the public, which accounted for almost a fifth of the wealth in Scotland at that time.
Wow.
When the ships arrived at the coast of Darien, they named the colony Caledonia and set about constructing a settlement called New Edinburgh. The attempts of the colonists, however, were to ultimately prove futile, as the settlement quickly succumbed to food shortages, tropical disease, and attacks from nearby Spanish forces.
What's interesting is so far, minus this part, all of this, I mean, I've already learned in school, you know, there's some little details I don't remember, obviously, but some of it's come back to me. So there's a lot more to learn, and I guarantee it's going to be very soon where I don't know this part, didn't.
Yeah, I didn't know about this part, and some of it is coming back to me too.
Yeah, but it's really freaking fascinating, though.
Despite a resupply in 1699, the settlement was abandoned, and the survivors, who totaled just a few hundred of the original 2,500, returned to Scotland in disgrace.
Wow.
Due to the total disaster of the Darien Scheme and the loss of public money that had been invested into it, Scotland was plunged into a financial crisis. Many then considered that their best and only chance of being part of a major power would be to share in the benefits of England's colonial enterprise.
Got it.
By the turn of the 18th century, England and Scotland remained independent kingdoms, although the Glorious Revolution of 1688 had dramatically shifted the political landscape within the British Isles. The Catholic James II was deposed and replaced with his Protestant daughter Mary and her Dutch husband William, who became King William III of England and Scotland. Legislation was passed in England so that only Protestants could inherit the throne, but this law did not apply in Scotland, and so, under the reign of Queen Anne in the early 1700s, efforts were made to unite the parliaments of both nations and secure a Protestant line of succession for the monarchy. When the Acts of Union were passed in 1707, England and Scotland were then united into one kingdom under the name of Great Britain. Over the following decades, Britain became involved in several wars with other European powers, which were fought not only on the continent, but also wherever their overseas colonial interests lay. After the War of the Spanish Succession concluded in 1714 with a victory for Britain and her allies, peace negotiations granted territorial concessions from the defeated French and Spanish, with Newfoundland and Acadia in North America passing into British control, as well as the strategic Mediterranean islands of Gibraltar and Minorca. Meanwhile, the British East India Company, which was not technically part of the empire, but nevertheless still pursued its colonial interests, was engaged in military operations against its French counterpart across the subcontinent. The aftermath of the Battle of Plassey in 1757 wrestled control of Bengal away from the local Nawab ruler and his French allies, leaving the British to become the leading military and political power in the region. This acted as a springboard for the British East India Company to expand its territory further in later years, either assuming direct rule themselves or via local rulers who were threatened with force from the company's private armies. Further conflicts of the 18th century, namely the War of the Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War in particular, gifted Britain even further territorial concessions at the expense of her rivals. In North America, the British captured Quebec in 1759.
That's a cool picture, though.
And effectively ended French colonial efforts on the continent with the annexation of New France by 1760. Florida passed into British control from Spain, leaving virtually the entire eastern seaboard of North America in British hands. The Treaty of Paris, which ended the 7 Years' War in 1763, also ceded the Caribbean islands of Dominica, Grenada, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines, as well as Tobago, to Britain, which was now the most dominant colonial and maritime power of the age. Throughout its history, the British Empire was...
That sounds crazy, though. Like, I mean, I again, most of this I remember from school. The details, no. I don't remember the details.
Details in years, dates, no.
No. But look at the map. Like, even at this point, right? Like, it's insane. Look at North America. Well, looking at this, I'm sure, and like I said, we remember some of this like from school, but I'm sure this is like very basic information. Is it not for most of you?
I would think it is for most of them.
Yeah.
That's your history, and of course you're going to remember all the places that you've been.
I feel bad for you guys because you have such a deep, rich, long history. I don't know what your history class was like, but I want no part in that.
Very long history class.
Could never remember all this, but it is really fascinating. Sorry, seeing that map is it's just insanely cool. At the same time, it's impressive, and it's also like, huh, what could have happened? Not saying I wanted it to. We loved you guys. But also, too, like, I'm like sitting there going, okay, this is something to do with, at some point, with my ancestors coming over here. Protestant,
exactly.
Always Protestant, the whole line, both sides of the family. At some point, they came over. It's fun. I would love to find the puzzle pieces and put them all together.
Yeah, to find out when they exactly came.
Don't know if I'll ever be able to.
Time power of the age. Throughout its history, the British Empire would be powered by two components that went hand in hand with one another. Firstly, mastery of the high seas through naval supremacy, and secondly, indomitable mercantile trade that was free from foreign aggression. This exponential increase in trade gained immense wealth for Britain through the taxation of goods that passed through its ports. However, the issue of taxation itself would soon lead to revolution and the first major colonial loss for the empire.
Which one might that be?
Although Britain considered its colonies to be sovereign territory, it did not afford them the same rights and privileges which were enjoyed on the British mainland. Throughout the 1760s and 1770s, relations between Britain and its 13 colonies in America became increasingly strained due to Parliament taxing the colonies without their consent or representation. Many within the 13 colonies considered this a breach of their rights as Englishmen and formally renounced the authority of Parliament in 1775, resulting in the outbreak of revolution. Britain sent troops to quell the rebelling colonists, but in the following year of 1776, the leading political figures of the colonies assembled to form the Second Continental Congress and declared their independence from Britain.
Also known as the original Brexit. Sorry.
Good one.
Sorry, I hope I didn't offend anyone.
After a protracted war of 8 years, Britain's military forces in the colonies were finally defeated, and the United States of America was recognized as an independent nation. The loss of America marked a sea change for the British Empire.
Hi, cousins.
After this, British colonial efforts shifted towards Asia, the Pacific, and Africa, where explorers had charted many new lands yet to be colonized by Europeans. One such explorer was Captain James Cook, who mapped and claimed much of the Pacific Ocean, including New Zealand and the eastern coast of Australia, in the name of Britain. Although Cook was killed on the island of Hawaii during his third voyage, the discovery...
Someone get that man a compass.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't understand all these squigglies and color squigglies. What's the green line
Trying
mean?
to find
What does
land,
the
I
blue
guess?
line mean?
I don't know. He
What
is
do
not
they
really
mean?
giving us... We need a key.
And the dotted line and
Colored chart.
I guess it's just showing he went all over the place.
Sorry to wind that back. That was just distracting.
including New Zealand and the eastern coast of Australia, in the name of Britain. Although Cook was killed on the island of Hawaii during his third voyage, the discoveries he made during the 1770s island of Hawaii, Australia, in the name of Britain. Although Cook was killed on the island of Hawaii during his third voyage, the discoveries he made during the 1770s would be instrumental to the further expansion of the empire. Australia was to serve as a penal settlement for British convicts, who would otherwise have been transported to the 13 colonies before they were lost. The first shipment of convicts arrived in the colony of New South Wales.
Wait.
I know, I'm like, did you hear that, Dale?
So Australians were supposed to be Americans.
Yeah.
Did not remember hearing that in previous videos.
No.
Did you?
I heard that they sent convicts to both.
Originally, they were sent here, right? First?
Yeah.
Oh.
Huh. The more you know.
I think we
The more you remember.
I think
and the more you remember.
I think we probably heard that before. Just didn't quite catch that one.
Right.
But still, interesting. Aussie friends, what do you think of that? They're like, nah, nope. Huh. So there would have been no Vegemite. Or we would all be eating Vegemite.
Oh, no.
I'm just messing with you guys. I hope you know we're just joking with you. That's fascinating. I'm rewinding that 10 seconds. I just want to hear that again.
British convicts, who would otherwise have been transported to the 13 colonies before they were lost. The first shipment of convicts arrived in the colony of New South Wales in 1788, and this practice of sentencing criminals to transportation continued into the middle of the 19th century. Britain also expanded its colonial interests into the North Pacific. Explorers such as George Vancouver and Alexander Mackenzie surveyed the western coast of North America in the 1790s, which subsequently opened up the territory to British mercantile interests, particularly that of the fur trade. Inroads were also made into the vast interior of the Rocky Mountains, which expanded British North America westwards. War with France in 1803 would once again challenge Britain's position as the dominant colonial power of the age, with the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte in the aftermath of the French Revolution. To protect itself and its colonies from invasion, Britain invested large sums of capital and resources into the war effort, with the Royal Navy blockading French ports and attacking French overseas possessions. A crucial victory was won at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 against the combined Franco-Spanish Navy, albeit at the loss of Britain's Admiral Lord Nelson, who was killed in action. Victory at Trafalgar not only eliminated the threat of invasion for Britain, but it also secured the uncontested supremacy of the Royal Navy for the next 140 years.
I have to say the Royal Navy is very impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, through time, very, very impressive.
By the time the Napoleonic Wars had drawn to a close in 1815, the victorious Allied coalition, of which Britain was a part of, secured further territory from the defeated French, Spanish and Dutch, who had been part of Napoleon's French Empire. The Ionian Islands, Malta, Mauritius, St. Lucia, the Seychelles, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana.
Those first groups is a lot of her ancestry. Aha!
Ceylon and the Cape Colony were added to Britain's already substantial number of colonies.
Okay.
Many of these Caribbean colonies contained countless plantations dedicated to the production of sugarcane, which, over the centuries, had become exclusively reliant on slave labour.
Yeah.
Although Britain had already profited tremendously from the transatlantic slave trade, the advent of the Industrial Revolution shifted the focus of merchants and capitalists to produce goods at home in Britain, rather than relying on slave-produced goods from the colonies.
Just quickly, don't you wish you could just go back in history and just change all the bad parts? Don't you just wish you could just do that and just not erase it from like current time, but just go back and redo it?
Yeah, redo
you know,
it.
you
better.
wish you could just know.
Right the wrongs.
Yeah, it'd be pretty cool. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way.
At home in Britain, rather than relying on slave-produced goods from the colonies. Additionally, growing political pressure from abolitionist groups eventually forced the hand of the British government to abolish the slave trade within the empire in 1807. It would be another 27 years, however, before the institution of slavery itself would be formally abolished in 1834.
Okay.
The period from 1815 to 1914 has often been described as Britain's imperial century. After effectively seizing control over the Indian subcontinent, the British East India Company looked to expand its interests further across Asia. Singapore was founded as a trading post in 1819 and later incorporated as a colony in 1824. Whereas in China, the East India Company, alongside the British government, were able to seize control of Hong Kong and Shanghai in the aftermath of the First Opium War in 1842.
I didn't know that.
The East India Company's control over India itself, however, was challenged in 1857, when local troops rebelled against their British commanders. In what became known as the Sepoy Rebellion, the East India Company fought against troops previously under its command and retook the territories that had been seized by the mutineers. After the hostilities ended the following year, the British government decided to dissolve the East India Company, believing that it could no longer rule and administer the country effectively.
How'd y'all have enough soldiers? I was just like, and then, you know what cracks me up though? I'm sitting here like, China's monstrous, right? It's huge. I'm like sitting here laughing in my head, like, Wouldn't surprise me if you didn't have occupied, all that at one point, like all of China.
Yeah.
Kind of surprised you didn't.
Just kind of battles had gone a little differently. How things might be
but I'm just
different
like,
now.
Good Lord, you guys were always in something. Always.
They were.
It's insane
across
to
the
me.
globe.
It's insane. It's kind of mind-boggling, really, if you think about it. It just really is.
India was then brought under direct British rule in 1858
I didn't
and
know it was
became the
1858.
most valuable possession within the empire, colloquially named as the jewel in the crown.
Yeah, I knew that.
An emerging threat to Britain's imperial ambitions during the 19th century came from the Russian Empire, which wished to expand its territorial possessions and sphere of influence into Central Asia and the Mediterranean to fill the void of the collapsing Ottoman Empire. When Russia invaded the Ottoman-controlled Balkans in 1853, Britain, alongside France, entered the war in support of the Turks, fearing that Russia could threaten their colonial interests in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. The resulting Crimean War of 1854 to
Just learned a little bit about
1856 was a resounding defeat for Russia and a confidence boost for the British, who remained the dominant global imperial power.
Florence Nightingale.
Although the situation between Britain and Russia in Central Asia remained uncertain, a partial settlement to the issue, known as the Great Game, was reached in 1878, which established respective spheres of influence. The British also gained control of Cyprus from the Ottomans that year. As a surety, it would be used to defend against any further Russian expansion.
Okay.
The continent of Africa also witnessed a consolidation of British colonial power during the 19th century. British immigration to the recently acquired Cape Colony began to increase in the 1820s, which pushed out thousands of Dutch-descended settlers, known as Boers, into the northern hinterland. Resentful of British rule, they established their own independent republics, namely the Transvaal and Orange Free State, but these two eventually succumbed to British occupation with the conclusion of the Second Anglo-Boer War in 1902. Meanwhile, in North Africa, the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869, which linked the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, proved of vital strategic importance for British trade routes.
Yeah.
Although Britain could not take direct control of the canal, it was able to militarily occupy Egypt in 1882, but did not consider it to be formally within the empire.
How? How did... Again.
It's just amazing how they can get so many troops in there and do this.
One war ends, another one starts, and it's like, we got troops to send, we got troops to send. Like, I don't understand. It's crazy. Like you said at the beginning of the video, when you look at the map and you see the UK, right? It's like tiny. Yet
a small landmass, but
it's like I don't know, what's something that makes itself like that kind of repeats itself. Like they can make
like a copy machine.
It's like the Clone Wars.
The Clone Wars.
Stormtroopers. You guys invented them. Well, it was kind of a British movie. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Further territorial expansion in what became known as the Scramble for Africa in the late 19th century
I don't really
saw
think
Britain
I knew that.
gain control of much of the eastern and southern parts of the continent.
Not
Efforts
bad.
were also made to build a continental railway from the Cape to Cairo, although this was never completed. As the 20th century dawned, Britain's position as the leader in world trade and adoption of the role of global policeman allowed it to also control the economies of nations who were not part of the British Empire, such as China, Argentina, and Siam. An electrical telegraph network, known as the All Red Line, was completed in 1902, which allowed Britain to communicate directly with all of its overseas colonies across the empire.
Okay.
What?
As
I didn't know that. Did you know that?
I did not know
Did you
that.
you guys knew that, right?
I'm sure
I
they
feel
knew
stupid.
that.
I feel stupid. Really? 1902? Hold up.
control the economies of nations who were not part of the British Empire, such as China, Argentina, and
with it.
Siam. An electrical telegraph network, known as the All Red Line, was completed in 1902, which allowed Britain to communicate directly with all of its overseas colonies across the empire. As Britain's predominantly white colonies developed economically and socially, they sought to gain political independence from the mother country. Canada was formed into a confederation in 1867 and granted the right of full self-governance, with the exception to international relations. Australia and New Zealand followed similar paths in 1900, becoming newly created dominions of the empire. Ireland also hoped to gain some form of independence from Britain during this time. Multiple Home Rule bills were put before the British Parliament, but these were all defeated on the grounds that partial Irish independence would pose a threat to the unity of the empire. The threat to the empire, however, would ultimately come from Germany and the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. During the conflict, Britain relied heavily on the empire for importing food, resources, and crucially, military support. Over 2.5 million men from Britain's dominions and colonies served in the First World War, with many from Canada, India, Australia, and New Zealand making the ultimate sacrifice for king and country. Britain was able to defeat Germany and its Ottoman allies in the war, and annexed much of their territory in the Middle East, Africa, and the Pacific. Victory, however, came at a heavy price for Britain, and signalled the beginning of the end for the empire. Although 1921 marked the peak of the British Empire's territorial possessions, Ireland was granted independence that same year, and soon other nations within the empire began to question when they may become independent also. The outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 put a temporary halt on this, as Britain once again turned to the empire for economic, material, and military support. Though ultimately victorious, Britain was bankrupted by the war and was no longer in a position to support its overstretched and questioning colonies. Gradually, throughout the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, the colonies and dominions of the empire were granted their independence from Britain. In what was recognised as the wind of change, almost 400 years of British colonial history came to an end. Although almost all these newly independent nations did not sever ties with Britain completely, and agreed to join the political association named the Commonwealth.
Yeah, but you know what? Even though some aren't in the Commonwealth, we didn't sever ties completely. We still love, respect, fight together, you know, stand together, die together.
Side by side.
And love together.
And learn together, like we're doing here today.
Yeah, so,
With 14 of these nations also retaining the British monarch as their respective head of state. Perhaps
go back.
retaining the British monarch as their respective head of state.
I'm just making sure I get them all. Sorry.
Perhaps what many see as the final and most symbolic representation of the end of the British Empire came in 1997, when Britain formally handed over Hong Kong to China.
Ah, that's right.
The legacy of the empire, however, remains with us to this day, as the English language is the most widely spoken on Earth, and British culture, practices and customs remain universally popular. Modern Britain itself can even be seen as a microcosm of the empire, with people of almost every race, nationality, religion and culture that were once under British rule, now living on the very island that began the journey of empire all those years ago.
Well, that's a lot to cram in a 22-minute long video.
That is.
So there was a lot at the beginning I knew from school. But as I said, you know, the details, no, didn't remember those. And then a lot towards the middle and the end did not know. But I just go back to, it's absolutely fascinating, you know, looking back at history and seeing how such a small little country, or landmass, I should say, was able to conquer the world, essentially. It's just mind-boggling. I don't care how many times we've watched, and we actually really haven't watched much on this topic, but every time I hear about it even, it just, it's quite shocking.
It is quite amazing. I mean, we think about nowadays with all the technology and how easy it is to travel around, but then you think back to the times and the travel back then. I mean, like I said, the Navy, the ships, that was key in doing any of this. And to be able to get across the oceans and the seas, to get to those land masses, to rule there, and to even start trade and work out deals there. I mean, it's
the whole
incredible.
like you said, the Royal Navy in itself has always been probably the most incredible navy in the world, and just able to accomplish pretty much anything and everything. If you guys like this video, hit that like button, consider subscribing to the channel. Let us know your thoughts on this one. Anything that was left out, again, I'm sure there was. Any points of interest here that was glossed over too quickly? I feel like there was a few things. I would say that the British Empire is probably the most discussed, the most talked about in history. Do you disagree? I mean, it was massive.
Yeah, it was definitely massive and ruled so many different areas and so many different parts.
Yeah. How many countries celebrate their independence? I'm serious. I know that I've heard this number, but I don't remember what it is. I find that to be another part of an interest to me. I just think it's fascinating. But I really thought this was a well-made video. Let us know your thoughts on it. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon, guys. Until then, please love like jazz.
Be as strong as Tyson.
Bye.
Bye.